Today we'll be discussing about the compliance Copilot, the RAG chatbot that we developed for our iGaming industry's compliance team. And just to introduce ourselves, my name is Yusung Nam. I am a data scientist at our AI Center of Excellence team in Games Global Limited. And my co-speaker is Mr. Michael Golko, a principal architect for AI ML at Snowflake, who has guided me significantly to develop this chatbot. Right, and just to introduce who we are, so we are Games Global Limited, and we are a company that develops a lot of casino slot games for different operators around the world. And we consist about 40 different studios internationally, ranging from Africa, US, for example, and even Latin America, for example, as well. And what I want to highlight is that we are a company that's highly regulated industry that focuses on responsible gambling. We want to make sure that the players have the maximum satisfaction at the same time. So what we'll be talking about is obviously introduce to you about what our regulatory compliance team is doing, what kind of problems they go through, and at the same time, what our AI COE team can assist them at the same time, the solutions that we provide. And we will guide you through evaluating that as well. And Michael will then take over, and he will explain to you about the future roadmaps and improvement that we can make sure that these apps can be great towards the future. Okay, so the introduction of our regulatory compliance. So what is it, right, exactly? The compliance is overseen by higher authorities, right? So for example, you can see in the screen here, UK Gambling Commission. So these guys are the ones that regulate and develops a new laws every single time. And I want to also make sure that these laws and regulations always evolve, meaning that they are constantly changing. And it's not just one set of rules for every single market. It's region specific, meaning that there are different regulations for different markets. And as I mentioned here as well, you see it covers areas like fair play, responsible gambling, and anti-money laundering to make sure that the players are always protected, and we are making sure that there are no vulnerable players. And as I mentioned here as well, builds player trust. So the question is, if we are non-compliant, then what happens to us, right? Obviously, the license gets revoked, meaning that it will be hindered operationally and financially at the same time, meaning that legal actions can happen, reputation damage can happen. So the question is, who are the people that allows us to make sure that this doesn't happen and we are always compliant? And that is the technical compliance officers. And these guys are the ones that basically bridges the main authorities, gets the regulations, translates those languages into the technical systems, and ensure that the regulatory requirements are met for our slot game products, right? So that the customers can play, have fun, have the maximum satisfaction at the same time. Now the question is, what kind of business challenges do they go through? They came to us and saying that, hey, we have a lot of regulations set in place for different markets. They are always changing. How do I keep up with that? There are high risk of human error, as I mentioned here, right? Because they have to manually go through every single documentation that contains fat text of tabular data, textual data. And it takes quite a long time for them to process those documentations, which are lengthy, and at the same time, it puts them under huge amount of stress. As I mentioned here, it says burnout, right? And because of that, the delayed queries can occur at the same time as a result. And this is just a picture that I want to highlight. This is our Confluence page under game compliance. And you can see on the average, around about 1,000 visits every month. And only 10 of them is in our technical compliance team. They have to answer and kind of query and answer those questions every single time. So you can see they're under quite a lot of pressure. So as our AI COE team, what kind of solution that we can provide? Before that, let's dive into the data data that they always deal with, and that is the PDF and Confluence page. So for example, you can see here there are a list of pictures that are showing you the PDF documentations. You see that's the PDFs and Confluence. This is the Confluence page. You can see on the left, there are many, many parent pages and child pages that contains a lot of data in tabular format and fat text and etc. What I want to highlight here is, like I said to you, I'm reiterating again, the data is quite intensive and extensive in terms of regulation and compliance. The question is, how do we process this, for the customers and for the employees to kind of ingest it very easily? So remember, the data comes from multiple sources, right? The data is always evolving, constantly changing. At the same time, how do we make sure that the information also categorized according to the right market? And how do you also make sure that the security and the role-based access is set in place so that the sensitive data can be also protected? So this is just a very, very high-level overview of what we did, right? So you take the documentations, process them using the Snowflake notebooks on the schedules and data streams, so you make sure that new data and regular updates can happen. And we make use of the Cortex AI, Cortex Search Service, which I'll get to now, and then we develop a RAG chatbot. Now, before Cortex Search Service was introduced to us, right, I managed to develop the RAG setup traditionally, right, using manual embedding setup, using vector DB database like PG Vector, for example, using Docker to orchestrate all of that. And it's manually extensively, tiring, right? But when Snowflake came to us and, hey, here's a Cortex AI, Cortex Search, I'm like, oh, this is a mind-blowing thing, because it's a declarative calling. Instead of you having to do everything manually, with Snowflake, you can just call it in one single line of index. It's native to Snowflake. Everything is automatic, and it runs serverlessly in Snowflake. So this is like just a very basic example of the code itself, right? You can just say create or replace Cortex Search Service. This is just for the Confluence data sources. And you can see you can instantiate the warehouse, the compute, how often does it get processed with a target lag. You can also instantiate the embedding model. Also, the reason that we chose Snowflake Cortex Search Service is because of their hybrid retrieval, right? It consists of the semantic and lexical lookup, right? So for example, if a user or technical compliance officer asks a question about, hey, can you tell me anything about the North American market? Then because the data is, I've categorized the markets according to their parent market, you'll be able to look for the right embeddings, right? So for example, like US and Canada, and make inference on that as well. In terms of the lexical lookup, this is almost like translating the language, the complex language of the compliance into a language that we can understand and the models can also understand very easily, right? And combining that, so it's a very brief picture about if a user asks a question about, hey, what is the return to player rate in a Greek market? That's the hybrid retrieval with the semantic and keyword. That's the re-ranking, and it is able to get the right chunk and right context. And you can see on the right. Yes, to your right, yeah. What's also sexy about Snowflake is they also have Streamlit in place, right? Almost like a dev tool that you can develop a front end for. The customers and employees can interact with the Cortex Search Service and query the data. So this is our end-to-end RAG pipeline with Snowflake. So we have our two data sources, so Confluence and PDF and documentation. Push that into Snowflake using their functions like parse documents, which converts the contents into markdown format for the models to understand very nicely. Chunk them using another function called the split text recursive character, and we have our final table. But we don't just stop there. We make sure to also classify the markets based on, like US, for example, UK, is it from South America? And we do this classification and then push that into a Cortex Search Service, and automatically it builds on the indexing, embeddings, and does a hybrid retrieval. And in the middle there, bottom right, we can see that I've built a Streamlit in Snowflake such that the users can interact with the data and ask the model and generate the answers, right? And the feedback I've implemented here as well. Users can also press on the thumbs up or thumbs down, meaning they can rate the question, meaning that the good question will always go into our golden data set, bad question will go into negative data set. I'll show you what we use that later, but it's almost like a constant feedback and a constant loop so that the models can also guide the users and also guide the model itself to answer very nicely as well. So let's get to our demo quick. Okay, so this is our chatbot, very simple demo here. So we can ask questions like, what is the RTP in African market, for example, right? Because we are from South Africa. So at the background, like I said to you, in the background, the model does the hybrid research, semantic lexical lookup, and the re-ranking, and is able to then generate you a nice answer like this before. So from South Africa, the minimum RTP requirements in South Africa are 85%, 80% for different games, and you get the point, right? And what I've also designed is that so you have a Confluence and PDF documentations, and I've also developed a link to all these references. So if you click one of them, for example, like return to player percentages, it will take me to our Confluence page. This is freely available anyway, so I've gotten their permission to show them these things. But if you scroll down to South Africa, so you can see here minimum RTP for various games types, like 85% on slot, 80% on table games, 80% for limited gambling machines. And if you check back, you can see it has that information correctly satiated, right? And we can ask the same thing, right? So what is the RTP in United Kingdom, for example? And let's wait for a bit, right? Okay. All right, so it also generated a very nice answer that there's no specific minimum RTP percentage required by UK regulations. So if you click one of them as well again, and go to United Kingdom, let's go to the United Kingdom, where are you? There we go. Here it says information on game RTP must be clearly and easily available to the player, and no specific minimum percentage indicated in the regulation, which is mentioned in the information here as well, right? The question that you can also ask now is, if you look at the Confluence and PDF references here, they are mentioned with a link, right? But if you look up here, it only had the link for the Confluence and not the PDF. So I've designed the app such that if there are no information available for different documents, then it will mention that it's not available, and vice versa. And this is the menu that on your left here, this is the menu. Users can also upload documents, right, to update the embedding model. So here I can ask, okay, I want to add United Kingdom documentations, and at the top it says successfully uploaded the documents into our internal docs, right? And you can also turn on, this is for development purpose, for showing a row of research response. So let's say artwork requirement in Alderney, right? If I type in that, then you can see on the left here, it is able to generate and retrieve the right chunk based on the location that I specified, which is Alderney. So it's pretty solid. With that, let's go back to our slide. Good. So now that we have developed the RAG chatbot, the question is, how do we make sure that our model is trustworthy? How do we make sure that users can trust this model, right? And when we starting to develop this, there are a lot of hurdles that we face in our Gen AI iGaming compliance. The most major thing problems that we face is the quality, hallucinations. We had a few cases where, some of the markets from UK gambling commission was being implied to be right for the Canadian market example, right, which is wrong, which resulted in answers not being grounded. We want to also make sure that the governance is also in place, handling things like sensitive players, operator data. We also want to make sure that because the quality is so bad, because things like due to answers from fragmented compliance sources and answers not being grounded, legal exposure from incorrect or misleading responses can happen, right? And another big thing is efficiency, right? Even if you have the accurate data, if the latency and the retrieval duration is so long, obviously the experience of the employees and the compliance officers is going to decrease, you know, and how do you also keep up with the new regulation updates that's coming up? And what's also very nice with Snowflake, with their AI observability feature, is that they use something called a RAG triad to measure their performance. So just to briefly explain, you have your context, right? Context relevance is the retrieve context relevance to the query. And if that is very good, the groundedness will be increased. That means that the response and answer quality will also be very great. But when we starting to develop it, we started the chunking process very, very low, because obviously that's how you start with it. And because we didn't know the right amount, the amount of the responses generated and the context that's been retrieved was pretty much bad. So which means that the groundedness was bad. That means the response quality will also decrease. But by adapting to the astronomical amount that the compliance team always adapts to, with the right chunking strategy, because there's no gap in the knowledge, that results in the answer relevance being very good, as you saw in the demo just now. So this is the dashboard of the AI observability live demo. So let's swap to another one where I can take you through the live demo of what it looks like. Okay, let me swap this into our light mode, yay. So this is the evaluation metrics that I created, right? You can just navigate to the evaluations, and I've created the app using TrueLens, which is freely available in Snowflake Notebook. You can just call the TrueLens package. So if you get an access to this one, it gives you a very nice overview of, you know, the three RAG triad metrics that we have that I've described to you now: answer relevance, context relevance, and groundedness. And remember, I told you about all these questions that we have rated, right? The golden data set. And these questions were rated by the subject matter experts, which are the compliance officers. And so these questions are the ground truth answers and questions that you can use to evaluate them. And yeah, so pretty much it explains to you about a lot of the metrics. But now what I want to also highlight is, if you look at the context relevance, remember, if it increases, then the others also should increase. But if the context relevance is bad, then others should decrease, right? But the question is, how the hell did this happen? You know, 0.64, but then the answer relevance is like 100%, and groundedness is 0.9. So what I've coded originally is that because we're doing a retrieval from both PDF and Confluence, so if I ask a question about like, hey, you know, what is the RTP in Alderney? Obviously, Confluence might have answers to that, the reference, but PDF might not. Because I've hard-coded it, then the PDF will still have to retrieve any information relative to the Alderney market, despite even if it's not containing those information. So, but now, because the reasoning models are so great now, it will be able to filter out those information and still generate the right answer, because it still contains the right answer that's in the context that we retrieved. Yeah, so the question is, what's the final result? You know, what do we find at the end? Oh, let me go back to notable achievement. Yep. So as you can see, the latency, the average time that it took to retrieve those informations, about 5 seconds, which I think is pretty solid, right? Obviously, I'll explain to you about the answer relevance, context relevance, and groundedness. So to improve the context relevance, maybe I could improve the retrieval processes, but otherwise, all the other stuff are pretty decent. And in terms of the business metrics, the compliance team reached out to me about it, and they said approximately they can save about 8 to 10 hours per week per individual for 10 members. So if you convert that into cost, for example, they mentioned that they've gained 25% productivity gain. If you convert that into a cost, about $250,000 will be saved per year, which is astronomical amount with this app. And they've also came back to me with a nice fat chocolate saying, thank you so much for saving our time. A lot of positivities, right? And what they also liked was that it's constantly improving, you know, with the feedback loop that we have, the question that they rate, will always provide the model with the right answers to guide the model to generate and give you the right answer. So that's it from my side. I will hand over to Michael to tell you about the improvements and roadmap. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for sharing the story of Games Global for the compliance chatbot application. As with all projects, obviously, this is an iterative approach. We will improve over time, and I'm happy to give you some ideas of what we will probably do next in our journey. This is one example where, for example, RAG could fail. Right here on the left, you see a document from the UK Gambling Commission. And this one is actually describing what deposit limits are in place before you have to do some financial risk checks. And as you can see on the right, actually there's a timeline with different values, right? So for example, in 2024, it was £500. Then in 2025, it was decreased to £150, and maybe in the future, this could be a completely different value. The problem is, if we have multiple documents in our knowledge base, how do we make sure that we are retrieving the most recent one? Because obviously, the most recent one is the one we are interested in, unless we are specifying in the question, like, what was the limit actually in 2024? Then we might want to have the 2024 document, but usually we want to have the most recent one. So this is one challenge that we're trying to solve. And in the retriever that you was talking about in Cortex Search, there are certain ways of specifying, for example, to favor or to give more weight to more recent documents. So that is one area that we will definitely explore as one of the next steps. Another example where it's not completely failing, but we can do better. So for example, here we are asking, when should iGaming operators file a suspicious activity report? And we have a nice chunk here, and we got an answer. iGaming must conduct enhanced due diligence when a player deposits more than 2,000 euros. However, it doesn't say anything about the SAR, right? So this answer is kind of bad. But if you would add more information to it, so maybe a second chunk, or if you use a different chunking strategy, we increase the chunk we are creating, you see that this answer is now much more tailored towards our question. So that's definitely another area that we're experimenting with. Summing up a bit, so there are many, many different possibilities why a RAG application might not be as good as you want, right? Here just some examples, like for example, context relevance, one of the key metrics you was mentioning. It could be that there's just a retriever mismatch, right? We're selecting the wrong documents from our knowledge base. Root cause for that could be similar documents that are time dependent. Remember the UK gambling document I showed 2 slides before? If we are selecting the wrong year, we will give the wrong answer. And why do we give the wrong answer? It's not because the LLM is not capable of generating the right answer. It's because we were giving it the wrong context. So here, what we would do is add what we call signal boosting, saying that dependent on the timestamp, more recent documents will be weighted higher. Answer relevance, what could happen here is that the context might be relevant, but it's still incomplete. So remember the second example that I had, the answer was not too bad, but it was not fulfilling all of the requirements because the context was just too small. What you could do is, and what we did, is increase the chunk size. And last but not least, groundedness, the third and last metric that we were looking at. What could happen here is actually that your context might also be too large, and the LLM will then partially ignore the context. So in that case, what you could do is decrease the chunk size. You see, there are a lot of options to configure your pipeline for retrieval-augmented generation, and therefore it's very, very important, and I'm glad that you already did this, have this evaluation framework in place, check your pipeline, understand where are my failing components. Because what I see many customers do is they have this golden data set of questions, they know the expected answer, and they just count like, okay, from these 50 questions, like, I don't know, 45 are done well. What about the other 5? Why are they failing? If you don't do this deep evaluation, for example, using TrueLens, you have no idea where you have to adapt. Do I have to go to a better LLM? Do I have to adapt my retrieval part? You have no idea. In that case, you really, really benefit from having this evaluation framework in place. So I talked about the optimizations you could do in Cortex Search. I already mentioned signal boosting, which basically gives more weight based on a timestamp. But there are other things you could do, like, for example, title boosting. If you have markdown information in your documents, so for example, in Confluence, we have that. We know what is the header, what is the subheader, etc. So what we can do is chunk based on the titles, so that we are not breaking up between chapters. There's also something which we call term boosting, where you can boost important terms. So you can imagine that if I'm looking for a very specific market, like I know UK or Africa, I want to make sure that the country is actually giving more weight, right? So I want to make sure that I only retrieve documents from that specific country. Or the example I have here is, if I'm talking about fines, I definitely want to put a high weight on fine because that's the most important term in my question. So we can do that in Cortex Search as well. And last but not least, it's also possible to retrieve confidence scores. So basically, we are telling you how confident we are that this result that Cortex Search retrieves is relevant to you, and then you can filter based on that. And there are many, many more options, also options that are coming in the near future, that help you improve this retrieval part and finally improve your overall retrieval-augmented generation pipeline. The more long-term vision for us is to have this as kind of like a fully automated optimization process. So we have seen that you is already collecting a lot of feedback, right? People are giving thumbs up, thumbs down, and obviously we have a lot of metadata being generated in the background. And the idea is really collect it in some kind of structured fashion and then use it to automatically adapt, for example, the parameters of Cortex Search over time. Test different strategies. What is the best chunking strategy? What is the best retrieval strategy? Should I use signal boosting? Should I use markdown boosting? All of that we're trying to optimize automatically so that you don't have to focus too much on that, but actually we are trying to free you from that so that you can focus on the actual business questions you're trying to solve. So this is kind of the long-term vision where we are heading to. What is also very important is, given that we now had Summit, there were a lot of announcements, things like agents were announced, things like Snowflake Intelligence were announced. What you developed, this Cortex Search retrieval pipeline, is actually also one building block that you can easily utilize, for example, in Cortex agents, as well as in the very near future in Snowflake Intelligence. So these guys are basically in the pole position to make use of agents as well. So all the hard effort you already did, if you want to put this into an agentic solution in the future, I think we will probably take like 5 minutes to do that. I think that's really amazing. So definitely worth checking out Cortex Search right now to build your RAG pipelines. And then you're also already very good in shape to make use of agents. With that being said, thank you so much.